Mere grunts fighting an entire army! I am Prince Vegeta!
Get him, Dad!
I am the ruler of all Saiyans, even you, Broly! Then please try your best to make me kneel before you. Ah. Finished already? So it's true. You are all talk and no action. A true piece of trash.
Alright, so Zeta responded, and there's a lot of people in this comment section talking crazy about me getting debunked. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and just respond to all the arguments that Zeta made in the video against me. So let's get to it. But yeah, after this will be the last video I make in the back and forth, because at this point, if we don't debate after this, it just seems like a waste of time. So hopefully we can debate on some StreamYard shit, or like, I don't know. I just don't give a fuck about joining servers at this moment. Only servers I'm really in right now are like scan servers, and even then that's like few and far in between. I'm also not going to debate on this topic either, because like it just, what's the point of going over something that we've already been like talking about extensively in video format? It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, now let's get into it.
Not only are you blatantly assuming that the geometrical objects in the Phantom Zone actually reflect some spatial existence, but also that a fictional narrative cannot depict an outerversal realm by using a physical medium. It's logically permissible for a fictional narrative to display something only for the use of visual continuity or entertainment purposes, as opposed to reflecting literal physical ontology. For example, I can have a realm with no time and no space, and I want to draw this place because I think it would look cool if I expressed it in a visual format. Given my beliefs as the author, the objects, entities, or the entire visual representation of the realm cannot reflect anything in regards to physical ontology, because it's explicitly believed by me, who defines the narrative, to be a place that is aspatial atemporal. Storic tries to use the zone within a zone argument to prove that the Phantom Zone is spatial, but this argument is straight up booty, because within does not always have to entail physical existence. For example, within the abstract consciousness, there can exist ideas that exist within the mind, but it does not mean that the mind is physical. Another example is a syllogism, which is a type of argument that contains two or more premises that the conclusion is brought from. An argument is not something that is physical, it is a conceptual model that is used to instantiate justifications for beliefs within a linguistical framework.
So yeah, now we're off to a bad start already. You're not satisfying your burden. Just showing something that could theoretically be symbolic does not satisfy the burden of proof at all. You're the one claiming the Phantom Zone transcends all forms of space and time, so you need to demonstrate that your interpretation is necessary in order for this to go through, not just logically permissible. In the narrative we're talking about right now, we see corners, geometric structures, storms, and zones within zones. All of these are spatial descriptors, with corners specifically requiring multiple spatial coordinates intersecting at one singular point. So the visual and narrative evidence that I have gathered together openly proves my interpretation as opposed to what you're saying. And not only that, the only piece of evidence you have backing you is the linguistic structure of statements that I've already put into question. So at this point, you're just question begging. A, there's no scan that you ever showed proving that the Phantom Zone is above or existing without the concepts of time and space. B, something being spaceless or timeless is not synonymous with being above or without the concept of space and time. Something can be aspatial or atemporal, but the concept can still apply.
This is a contradiction very blatantly right here, because when we talk about something aspatial, atemporal, when we speak of atemporal, it contains the prefix a, which means to be not, without, or lacking. When applying the prefix a to adjectives, it sets a negation to the adjective itself. And when in context to aspatial and atemporal, something that is not spatial or temporal is not within the set of spatial and temporal things. So if you can apply spatial and temporal properties to something aspatial and atemporal, then those aspatial atemporal things would be in the set of temporal things, which completely goes against what aspatial and atemporal mean.
Firstly, your contradiction only works if aspatial and atemporal are interpreted as absolute negations of spatial and temporal properties. Because like I said before, in fiction, these terms are frequently used to just mean something outside of conventional space-time. The Phantom Zone is explicitly described as spaceless and timeless, yet it demonstrates and contains geometric structure and temporal succession. So either the canon contradicts itself, or the terms are being used in a non-absolute sense, and the evidence in the situation is pointing towards the latter.
That's not true at face value, because higher dimensional models still operate under additional degrees of freedom, meaning they still retain 3D space and more, meaning higher dimensional models are not spaceless and timeless. They are quite literally just additional spatial axes. Saying X exists outside of time can be interpreted to be the fourth dimension, but saying X has no time would imply that X is timeless. Those are completely distinct claims, and they don't always have to entail the same thing. I would agree with you if it's talking about maybe some alternate flow of time or some shit. I mean, that's also available. I mean, there's plenty of ways you can semantically work on this argument, but at face value, it doesn't work. Also, you saying that this can be applied semantically in fiction does not verify anything in context to DC, because one, it's in question if DC uses these semantics that you're imposing, and using cross-verse semantics to justify other semantics in different franchises or verses is not exactly coherent, because semantics are relative to that specific franchise. And we definitely do not want to be using semantics from other fictions to justify other fictions.
So your claim about higher dimensions is literally irrelevant to the claim that I'm making. My argument was never that higher dimensions are literally spaceless or timeless. The point is about how authors use the words spaceless or timeless. You keep appealing to the correct technical meaning of the terms, but that is not the issue that we're dissecting here. Like I said before, the issue here is how DC writers actually use the terms in context. Words can be used differently from how they're strictly defined in dictionaries all the time. For example, the word ignorant is used by millions of people to mean rude, but technically in dictionary terms, it only means someone lacking knowledge. So once again, talking to me about how these words are supposed to be used does not address how these words are actually used in practice. It's not helping. If DC writers describe something as spaceless or timeless while simultaneously depicting spatial geometry or temporal progression, that is evidence that the terms are being used in a non-absolute sense. So pointing out the technicalities of the meaning behind higher dimensions does not address any piece of my argument. Also, Zeta, I'm not saying because other fiction use these words this way that DC must use them the same way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying across many works of fiction, authors use words like spaceless, timeless, beyond space, and outside of time to describe places that are separate from conventional space-time, not realms that literally lack all spatial and temporal structure. I'm just talking about a pattern of usage within the medium, and the pattern that I'm on increases the likelihood that similar terminology in DC is being used in a comparable way. I'm not claiming it's proof by itself. I'm simply just saying that it provides contextual support for interpreting the terms that we're about to discuss.
Now, I'm going to go over why your alternative interpretation is extremely less parsimonious. One, it assumes that time and space exists, and if you didn't assume time and space exist, then it's just going to be aspatial atemporal. You're also positing the assumption that space and time are specifically referring to the 3D and 4D models. You're also assuming an existential state of being physically separated from the 3D space manifold. And lastly, in order for this argument to necessarily be the case, you have to be assuming that there's a space that exists that contains the 3D space manifold and the Phantom Zone in order for them to be existentially separated. Honorable mention, it assumes going outside the face value of what it means to be time-less and space-less.
Wait, how is your stance more parsimonious if it doesn't explain the evidence in an adequate fashion? Because in the scan that I'm pointing to, the Phantom Zone is stated to be spaceless and timeless, but it has corners, which is geometry, and temporal succession. So if we're taking your stance, which is the face value meaning of the word, no context being added or looked into at all, this openly becomes contradictory. Like, your interpretation is no space but geometry exists, no time but duration is right there before your eyes. Like, this is not explaining the data, so I don't know how what you're saying is more parsimonious to what I'm saying. Occam's razor can only work after explanatory adequacy is actually given. And speaking of assumptions being added, Zeta, you're adding more than I am. Not only that, but you're also lying about what I'm adding. For one, you'd have to assume that DC writers are using the terms literally. Two, the spatial and temporal properties shown are not real. And three, the text is not contradictory, except it is. Meanwhile, the only thing I'm saying and assuming is that the words here are usually used to mean outside of normal space-time. I don't see how container spaces or higher dimensional structures are necessities for my argument or interpretation to go through. So not only does the internal evidence contradict your own assessment, but also you're relying on additional assumptions that you cannot provide basis to.
And for consistency, it's literally stated to be distanceless, and any higher dimensional model necessarily requires distance. It is necessary for spatial frameworks to have distance.
Distanceless can literally just mean lacking the effect or relevance of distance, not necessarily the absence of space itself, but sure. Secondly, lacking the effects of something does not imply that that thing does not exist. For example, Superman is unaffected by gravity, but gravity still exists in the space around him. Therefore, distanceless does not prove the spatial structure is just non-existent in the Phantom Zone.
Or maybe it's a ray jam? Perhaps. Historic. I think you might be fading, because I think you forgot to debunk Superman scaling to mature Doomsday, who does scale to the Phantom Zone.
I'm not overlooking your scaling chain, but you know what? Fine. Superman Doomed was released in 2014, and during that run, Doomsday could not escape the Phantom Zone without external help from somebody by the name of Zadu. Zadu broke him out of the zone within the zone, and it was from that point on that Doomsday evolved, matured, and then ruptured a unquantifiable hole in the Phantom Zone. Flash forward to when Superman meets Rogol Zaar in the Phantom Zone in 2018. He states that Rogol is his equal and opposite in power, skill, and intent, which would put him over mature Doomsday and that weaker version of Superman in Superman Doomed. And Rogol cannot destroy the Phantom Zone. Therefore, using mature Doomsday and that out of context Superman scan while he's enraged is not enough evidence to support the interpretation of Superman being able to destroy the entirety of the Phantom Zone, as you have not demonstrated why Superman in that instance is within his right mind and is not blinded by his rage.
The statement does not need to mention or state anything about all constructs or all postulations of space-time. Also, if there's any quote-unquote given context that presents an opposition, please show that to me, because you're saying, oh, it's under a given context. All right, I mean, let's put the relevance here, man. But there seems to be an over-glaring issue that you didn't acknowledge throughout your own video. Even the most basic temporal models have to hold to these necessary confines. These confines being duration and temporal position, as well as spatial extension and spatial position. No matter how many higher dimensional transcendences you undergo, you can never escape these dimensional confines, which is why to actually be above the confines of time, you necessarily need to be outerversal. And even if this wasn't the case, it's consistent in DC for this to be an outerversal transcendence, because the same statement also includes the statement of being unconstrained or unaffected by dimensional space. And even if you have a microcell, just a microcell, you can understand that every single higher dimension operates under dimensional space.
So here you're just trying to get an absolute outerversal conclusion without proving the statement has an absolute scope. Saying beyond the confines of space and time does not automatically mean beyond all constructs and all frameworks of space-time, because those phrases are routinely used in weaker senses in fiction all the time. For example, like being outside of the timeline, disconnected manifold, alternate flow, distance being irrelevant, things of that nature. You then assume what the confines are as if DC is using your own technical brand of metaphysics, which is nowhere near evidence. You're just importing definitions at that point. If you want that to be the intended meaning, you have to prove it from the context. You then make the claim that no amount of higher dimensionality escapes those confines, and then conclude that to be above time, you must be outerversal. That outright becomes circular unless you prove the first statement means absolute non-dimensional transcendence. And lastly, unaffected by dimensional space does not mean or entail beyond all dimensionality. It can literally just mean not bound by conventional geometry, distance, or our space-time manifold, none of which are outerversal by nature. So until you can prove the scope of these statements in the DC context, you don't have a warranted inference path to outerversal. You're literally just making an assertion.
Not sure where you're getting the sum from, but this statement would be true if and only if the lion is a referential count for the overall generalized species. Like, for example, this is a limit beyond the human, as in me, you, us. So I'm not sure why you're saying this is an outlier, because it really just proves that statements can be very interpreted. If you mean outlier as in an inconsistent instantiation within a set of data, sure, I guess. Like historic, I hate to say this, but low-key, I don't think this helps your case at all.
Well, I mean, it makes sense as to why you don't think it would help me. I mean, you don't really understand the point in the first place, so let me go ahead and break it down. My point is that generality does not equal totality. Natural language statements about a category often function generically rather than universally. Saying beyond space and time does not automatically mean beyond every possible spatial and temporal framework. I think I said that like 15 times already. I've already mentioned countless interpretations that could also fit in line with this word in context, so if you want to interpret the statement as absolute transcendence of all dimensional constructs, you need contextual evidence showing that the statement is meant in that universal sense. Otherwise, you're just waffling, gang.
Yo, historic, directly speaking to you, but do you ever wonder if Discord niggas use these jargon terms in front of their parents at the dinner table? Look, you guys gotta understand, like, I'm ontologically not required to do the chores. Like, have you ever thought about that? I mean, that's just me though. Well, this is because the analogies are different. When Goku and Vegeta fuse, Goku's ki does not change fundamentally in any way whatsoever. Vegito is a completely new being distinct from Goku and Vegeta, but is the byproduct of them combining, meaning the new set of ki that is generated after fusing does not belong to Goku or Vegeta, which would mean that Goku's ki did not change. As for Superman, his power does change. The sun amps fundamentally change his power, because if he didn't, then he would not get any stronger. Unlike Superman, Goku is not getting stronger. He is combining himself with another individual to create a new being with his own set of ki, meaning no intrinsic change occurred relative to Goku's ki. Anyways, now that we've clearly indexed this to Superman, and this is clearly talking about his own identity with his own statistics, Superman specifically states he is stronger than he's ever been, which includes all prior points in time. This is literally the equivalent of a roided up gym rat taking steroids, which are external, and they directly change intrinsically how strong the gym rat is.
Your rebuttal misses the point of the analogy. The point of the analogy was not about whether fusion creates a new identity, it was about external conditions affecting power. Fusion combines Goku's ki with Vegeta's, which necessarily alters his state, and then does it again after there's a multiplier added to it. So it's insanely incorrect to say that Goku's ki undergoes no change. But anyway, that's beside the point. My point is about both of these things being circumstantial, both fusion and the sun amps. They depend on an external exposure to solar energy and a prolonged exposure to solar energy, and it's not his default combat state either. So the question is, why does he treat these circumstantial amps as his own consistent power? Why does he view these circumstantial amps on the same level as his baseline power? That answer has still not been given. And see, that's the issue. You're treating stronger than ever like it's some formal universal quantifier over every prior state and condition, but that's not automatically true in natural language. It could be hyperbole or state relative. than, meaning stronger than I've ever been right now or stronger than I've ever been in my normal condition. And that steroid analogy actually proves my point even more. A bodybuilder saying I'm stronger than ever can obviously be referring to him while on cycle, not his baseline strength. So the phrase alone is not helping you establish the scope that you need. If you want this statement to scale to Superman's standard power, you need contextual evidence that he's referring to his baseline or he's referring to all possible achievements of strength. If you can't give that, you're just assuming the broadest reading, and my point still stands. Sun dips are circumstantial and not consistently available in a normal fight. So my question is, why would he include them in this statement?
Okay, so there seems to be some issues with this argument. If we're just gonna reduce it to just some perceptive bullshit, then it completely defeats the significance of Superman popping out of the portal and Lex Luthor being terrified. And it's explained by Superman that the concepts have largely lost his meaning to him, so there has to be something beyond perception. And whatever it is, it has to exist, meaning that yes, this relates to something ontological. And using Levin's argument, it would explain why he got stronger and would explain his ability to cross distances that cease to be distance. Also, to attack your epistemic point, it can be both epistemic and ontological, or just ontological by itself. There is no internal contradiction for both. And to reduce this ability to speed compression, this argument's really bad because it explains the same data with the sole inclusion of assuming that distance is still there, and that it is just the ability to compress distance. But no, the statement says that it ceases to be distance, which means that he is reducing distance to zero.
Wait, what? Lex being terrified doesn't prove an ontological transcendence. It only shows Superman appeared overwhelmingly threatening. Lex is not the speaker, and the character reactions are not metaphysical proof. The only actual textual basis is Superman saying distance and related concepts have largely lost meaning, and the phrase distance that ceases to be distance, but even then, those lines are semantically compatible with a purely functional reading. The reading being that Superman is so fast or has such traversal that distance becomes practically irrelevant, i.e. crossed so quickly it behaves as if negligible. That can explain the exact same data, the feat, the reaction, the lost meaning line, without ever assuming literal metaphysical elimination of distance and no proof. So if you can show where it states that distance becomes zero or Superman transcends space-time frameworks completely and totally, I'm all ears. Like, you don't have any explicit narration, cosmology framing, consistent portrayal that distance and time do not apply. Your entire argument is just a circle of you using what's in question to prove what's in question over and over and over again. Also, I'm not denying something can be both epistemic and ontological. I'm saying you haven't shown why this is ontological, and until you do, your conclusion is optional at best, and I can easily dismiss it.
Easy cracking 90s WD is like cheese. Yeah, so it's really easy to debunk this argument. The Batman inches thing could literally just be reduced to Batman's perception of the source wall and not an actual reflection of the source wall's ontology. And the faster than light Superman thing is quite literally the worst refutation you could have done to the source wall because it low-key debunks itself. If you pay attention to the panel when Superman is going the quote-unquote speed of light, the High Father compares this light speed to his own state where he says that, oh, well, are you moving at the speed of light? I'm standing still. This implies that the source is not measure bound and that the High Father is changeless. So yeah, guys, these source wall debunks are not even consistent with their own scans.
Your rebuttal about perception actually works against the claim you're making. If Batman can perceive Superman moving through the source, then spatial direction and positional change, because motion can only be perceived through change in spatial position. In a realm with literally no direction or measurable structure, Batman would not perceive motion at all. More on that, the scene explicitly describes Superman moving at the speed of light, which is a measurable velocity defined by distance over time. If distance and time truly cease to exist in the source, then that statement would be meaningless. So the panel itself assumes measurable spatial and temporal relation. Highfather saying he is standing still does not establish that the realm is beyond measurement. It only describes his lack of movement relative to Superman.
Well, this is very explainable because the sixth dimension is the highest plane of existence and it's contextualized to be completely inaccessible, and this logic is very applicable towards every other prior dimension. And inaccessibility is necessary for qualitative transcendence. So given this, it's very expected and increases the likelihood of it being a qualitative transcendence.
No, it doesn't. Actually, you're affirming the consequent and not anything else. You can't say qualitative transcendence implies inaccessibility and then say inaccessibility is present, therefore qualitative transcendence is right behind it. You can't argue that. Something can be inaccessible due to seals, portals, method limits, or narrative constraints without being ontologically superior. For example, the Room of Spirit and Time door was literally destroyed, and because of that, they were sealed in that dimension. And the funny thing is, no one could access it from the outside. The only way it was opened up was because someone strong enough was able to manipulate their key and warp it. But you wouldn't argue that the Room of Spirit and Time was on a higher dimension because of that, right? So unless the inaccessibility is specifically caused by ontological superiority, this argument is literally faulty. Not only that, I don't really have any issue with the fifth and sixth dimension being above, but I'm arguing for everything in between that. That would include the sphere of the gods, the monitor sphere, the source wall, yeah, pretty much all that. Universal forces like the Speed Force, stuff like that. Zeta just made the random claim that every dimension below the sixth dimension follows along this idea of being infinitely above the last, and again, he did not prove this.
No, it doesn't hold relevance to dimensional tiering within DC, because Scott Snyder in the same scan admitted that these spaces do not correlate to literal physics. For you to accept that it still holds relevance would be an internal contradiction to what he said prior. And even if I grant quote-unquote bits separately is true, it can just be indexed to him accepting general physical models for DC Comics. It doesn't necessarily validate that dimensional tiering can now be applied or holds relevance to the fifth and sixth dimension within DC.
So the scans from Scott Snyder do not say that these spaces have no relation to spatial or dimensional structure. What he is saying is that they're not literal spaces so much as governing layers of reality, which means that Scott Snyder just conceptualizes them metaphysically rather than being a strict physical model, which is not a contradiction in a dimensional language or a spatial hierarchy, especially within the stories that he writes. And once again, this statement is quite literally backed by him saying that the science exists a bit separately for him. Zeta tries to give his own interpretation as to what that means, but honestly, it's not more likely than mine, like at all. The reason why is because his words, the science exists a bit separately for me, openly indicates that scientific ideas still inform the structure even if they aren't treated as rigid physics.
Okay, so now we're using Batman as a reliable source. This is where his argument starts to collapse. Batman specifically states that only the most powerful beings within the DC cosmology can access the 6th dimension. Yet somehow he can casually bring Batman and Superman. That's definitely not suspicious.
You realize Mr. Mixie and Batmite are both 5th dimensional imps, some of the most powerful characters in the entirety of the cosmology. It's not a contradiction. Even in the same issue that Mr. Mixie makes this statement, he literally says that he can access the 6th dimension because of the source wall being broken. And in that issue, he uses his power to quite literally create access to the 6th dimension. And from that point on, both Mr. Mixie and Batmite are shown to be able to access all 6 dimensions.
In future arcs beyond the Bronze Age, Mr. Mixie-Pedalic also says that there is only 4 beings that could access the 6th dimension. But in this comic run that Historic is mentioning, we're introduced to a new character from the 6th dimension that is a 5th additional character named Doomite, which contradicts the statement that only 4 beings could access the 6th dimension. Why did Mr. Mixie-Pedalic state that there was only 4 beings yet knew a 5th one in the past? The narrative of this comic run is heavily contradicted by the latter narratives or prior narratives to this comic run, hence we can dismiss this as inconsistent. It's narratively contradicted, so if you're gonna use Batmite, we might as well just acknowledge the narrative contradiction.
Hey, this contradiction only works if you're presupposing the idea that Mr. Mixie knew who Doomite was from the beginning of his inception, and that's just not the case. This contradiction also only works if you're assuming the idea that Doomite was made or existing during the events of Justice League issue 19 to 27, which is the exact time frame that Mr. Mixie-Pedalic makes a statement about 4 people being able to access the 6th dimension before the source wall was broken. The third assumption is the idea that Doomite himself was making the effort to make his presence known to all of the other imps before his first appearance. And no, I'm not talking about the World's Finest Annual for 2024. That's not what I'm mentioning. Because even after hearing his voice, Batmite and Mr. Mixie still had no clue who the hell he was. So at this point, this internal contradiction he's saying that my argument is positing, it's just not present. Because the parameters he needs in order to make this claim is just not there.
I never said that. I never said being above understanding means that you're above spatial and temporal dimensions. I literally never said this anywhere in the video. The whole point of me saying that was to negate the contradiction that people try to use to say that the 6th dimension is temporal. The problem is that since the 6th dimension is internally beyond understanding, and people such as scientists try to use models or physical theories to understand our reality, we cannot apply these physical models or physical theorems to the 6th dimension because it is beyond understanding. Because if it was applicable, then it would be within human understanding.
Except your argument implied it, which I hope you don't think explicit communication is the only way to propel argumentative process, because if you genuinely think that and we're this far into 2026, gang, come on. You use the statement of the 6th dimension being beyond imagination as backing and supplemental evidence as to why your interpretation of the realm not matching the theoretical 5 and 6 dimensional framework. You use that wording to justify your stance of ontological transcendence to a level beyond that of all dimensional frameworks. You can't just abandon that position and say, I never said that, when your argument directly implies that and needs it in order for it to go through.
Why are you using these really inconsistent scans to justify your claims? Because in the left side of the panel, it literally says that his speed goes beyond physics, which is inclusive of the speed formula, which hypothetically can allow for an infinite quantity of speed. On the top left, it says that he moves faster than he ever has, which would mean that he would scale above every other Superman feat, which, well, I actually justified the consistency for a lot of this shit now, didn't I?
Nah, you've been repeating the same style of argumentation since the beginning of this video. You're trying to make the leap in logic going from this to the maximal interpretation possible, and honestly, there's no evidence really supporting it. Saying Superman's speed goes beyond physics does not inherently imply infinite or immeasurable speed, not in the slightest. In fiction, the phrase often means breaking known physical laws, such as flying or moving faster than light, which is still operating under measurable parameters. Therefore, the statement does not demonstrate that Superman transcends all physical speed formula. And that last statement is just you presupposing that all of your previous statements or scalings for immeasurable speed or infinite speed have gotten through. And I hope you're not thinking the irrelevant speed shit got through, because nope. Showing that an interpretation is possible does not satisfy the burden of proof. You're the one claiming that the 6th dimension transcends all of space and all of time. So you need to be the one to show why this interpretation is necessary, not just plausible. On top of that, the 6th dimension, like I said again, is shown to show light propagation and temporal processes that openly showcase measurable distance, which completely undermines the claim that it exists beyond time entirely. We've already been over this. But yeah, again, we can set up the StreamYard anytime this week. I'm working on videos for the rest of the weekend and I got work, so it's just gonna be a lot of shit going on. But again, like I said, I'm open to debate. I'd rather we not debate on something that we've already spent hella time making videos on, so I guess we can debate on Janemba because that's the only topic that we haven't run yet. So yeah, it's been your boy. I guess I'm out. Peace.